Ladies and gentlemen, this RedGaming.com video, we're going to be discussing the Xbox One for a moment. There are rumours swirling around that the Xbox One will also run Windows 8 applications, and this is actually according to a product listing and description on Dell. And it's actually mentioned that there will be multiple different functions from Windows 8. Indeed, I'll read you out an exact quote. Consider the game officially changed with your favourite Windows 8 apps able to run on and synced to your Xbox One. Now your phone, desktop, tablet and TV can all give you a unified web and entertainment experience. Of course, there have been a plethora of different rumours regarding the Xbox One's operating system, many saying that it actually has a full version of Windows 8, minus the GUI and a few other key components. So in effect, it's very much like the main shell of the actual operating system is still running, and of course it does have that tri-operating system setup. Now that setup is going to be extremely important for Microsoft. Why, I hear you scream? Well, it's actually fairly simple. From what the developers have stated previously in interviews, the basic plan is that you get one main operating system. But that's a very small, thin layer, but it basically acts as the control. And then under that, you've got the game OS, and then you've got the app OS. So you could think of the let's call the main OS the control OS. We can call that operating system A, and then A controls B and C. They are basically B and C are basically running as virtual machines within the main operating system. Now, the host operating system is pretty thin. It doesn't have that much to it. It just basically acts as the control. But the reason that they've gone with this model is because it allows them to delegate certain resources. For example, CPU performance, GPU, as well as other bits and pieces. For example, let's say an application crashes, but you're in the middle of gaming. Well, in which case it will only take out the application, and in theory, obviously I've not developed on the systems to actually know this, but in theory, what should basically happen is that as long as it's not completely and utterly catastrophic, it should basically contain itself within that OS. So let's assume that the app crashes, the game should run absolutely fine. Similarly, if the app OS starts to become over bloated or goes over its allocation and needs to start doing things such as adding swapping and so on, it in theory at least should not affect the game, because you have a different and set resources for the game. And also, from Microsoft's perspective, it also allows another benefit, as providing they keep within the same size constraints, and we're not talking necessarily about on disk, but we're talking about within RAM, because obviously if you start taking up more RAM and you've already allocated that memory, or games developers have already allocated that memory to something else, you're going to get crashes. I'll give you an example in just a moment, but effectively speaking, they will be able to update the app OS whenever the hell they want to add extra features or more compatibility and so on and so forth, and it won't break compatibility with the games, which has been something that's been a bit of an issue with both the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 in the past. There's always, of course, been that concern that if they mess around with the GUI, or they mess around with something else, or they mess around with the libraries, in effect they could break compatibility with certain games. As I was saying just a moment ago, the basic theory is that as long as they keep exactly the same amount of memory, because that's the key right there. You can't start infringing, you can't start basically taking memory that was once allocated towards the system. Let's just work in a very simple to understand number system rather than using gigabytes, because then you've got to worry about megabytes and KB and everything else that goes into it, and that starts to get a little bit complicated. So instead, let's just go with a more arbitrary system, and let's just say you're splitting the memory reserves thusly. You've got 100 let's just say 100. It's not megabytes, it's just literally the figure 100. So we're dealing with integers here, we're dealing with whole numbers. And let's say that you've got 70 reserved for games, and let's say you've got 30 reserved for the app OS and the control OS. Let's just make this easy. But let's assume that 6 months down the line that Microsoft decide to release an update that takes 31, and thus you're leaving only 69. Please stuff your chortles. You're only leaving 69 for games developers. Well, the thing is, they've already developed titles. Those games have already been released that require, 70. So what happens effectively is that those games will crash because they're pretty much trying to address a resource that no longer exists. And just one or two, bytes, just one or two, literally bytes, not even kilobytes, just literally a couple of bytes of data that's trying to go to a location that's already in use can cause an application to crash. And that's why Microsoft have developed this system. As for the potential uses, I'm not exactly personally sure. I think this is going to be something that's going to grow over time. Obviously, that's going to be the key for both systems. We're not going to be seeing the same GUI that we're seeing on launch, say, 3 years from now, and that's understandable. There's going to be features that are added. There may be start to downplay features that weren't so popular, and of course there's going to be completely new features included as well. Microsoft does plan to do a lot of this cross-compatibility, and we do know from previous releases from Microsoft that they want to start to unify all of their application processes. In other words, they want to make it much simpler and much more, let's just go with a smoother experience, to create applications on a phone, to then make those applications work on, say, the PC or the Xbox, rather than having them so much of an insular experience. And of course, that's another reason why they are so heavily investing in Azure technology. Azure, of course, being their compute services. Regardless, hopefully you've enjoyed this video. I'm going to get going, so I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.